Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here reminding you to click like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment saying where you're listening from. This helps my video out a ton in the algorithm and ensures that I keep making historical content. For a man whose life was a saga of conquest, violence, and world-altering change, the death of Genghis Khan is shrouded in a surprisingly dense fog of mystery. We know the when and where, August of 1227, during a brutal and final campaign against the Tangut Kingdom of Western Xia, in what is now northwestern China. At around 65 years old, the great Khan was in failing health, yet he was personally overseeing a massive conflict. The Tanguts had betrayed him by refusing to provide troops for his other wars, and had allied with his enemies. His deathbed command, which his successors followed with chilling obedience, was to wipe the Tangut people and their culture from the face of the earth. This violent context is the backdrop for the central puzzle. Understanding why we don't know for certain how he died requires understanding a crucial decision made in that military camp. To prevent a collapse in morale and ensure the war could be prosecuted to its conclusion, Genghis Khan's death was ordered to be kept an absolute secret. This strategic concealment was ruthlessly enforced. According to later accounts, the funeral procession that carried his body back to a still undiscovered grave in Mongolia slaughtered anyone that crossed its path. This deliberate act of suppression created an information vacuum, a void into which rumors, legends, and competing historical narratives have rushed for nearly 800 years. The mystery of his death was a successfully executed military and political strategy, the conqueror's final direct command. The most influential and widely accepted explanation for the Khan's death comes from the Mongols themselves. This was recorded in their own foundational epic, The Secret History of the Mongols, a collection intended to educate future generations. This text, compiled for the royal family shortly after his death, is the oldest surviving literary work in the Mongolian language and our most significant native source. According to this account, the chain of events began in the winter of 1226. While on a hunt, Genghis Khan was thrown from his horse. The fall caused serious internal injuries and a high fever, but he insisted the campaign against the Tanguts continue. He lingered for months before finally dying the following summer, the clear implication being that he succumbed to complications from this accident. While this narrative comes from an unparalleled insider source, the nature of the text itself requires careful consideration. The Secret History is not a modern, objective history, but an epic chronicle, a work designed to create a foundational story for the Mongol people. To put it in a context any Crusader Kings player will instantly understand, this is essentially the commission epic decision in real life. It's not intended to be a true one-to-one account of events, but it is based in history with a strong dosage of poetic license. Notably, unlike other epics like this, Genghis Khan, while portrayed as a predestined conqueror of the world, also has distinctive flaws. For instance, its authenticity is bolstered by its inclusion of unflattering details about the hero of the tale. Genghis Khan is noted to have a fear of dogs and wolves, and most famously, the slaying of his own half-brother in a cowardly way is included. If this was a work of pure propaganda, these details would have certainly been omitted. While I don't think the instance with the brother requires any special explanation, Genghis Khan's fear of canines was extremely humiliating for a number of reasons. The Mongols deeply respected both dogs and wolves for their strength, loyalty, and spiritual significance. Dogs were seen as loyal guardians of the home and the herd and protectors against evil, while wolves were revered as ancestral symbols of courage and endurance. Further, wolves were seen as the very literal ancestors of the Mongol people, and powerful ancestors and gods were said to appear as wolves. But let's get back to this story about falling off a horse. For a culture whose entire military and social structure was built on unparalleled horsemanship, a death resulting from a fall is deeply ironic. Yet it's also a profoundly mundane end for a world conqueror. This very lack of heroic embellishment gives the story a powerful ring of truth. The significant time gap between the fall and his death also suggests that the accident wasn't the direct cause, but rather the trigger for a slow decline. This has the air of reality and reflects something that could definitely have happened. An old man who spent his life in the saddle falls off his horse, and his health declines. Simple as that. As the Mongols created a vacuum of information, their neighbors and enemies were quick to fill it with their own stories, each reflecting a different cultural perspective and political agenda. These competing narratives offer a fascinating glimpse into how the world tried to make sense of the conqueror's demise. Chinese sources, particularly the History of Yuan, which was commissioned by the new Ming dynasty, provide a more clinical, almost bureaucratic record. Compiled later but based on earlier court documents, this text states that Genghis Khan fell ill with a fever on August 18, 1227, and died just 8 days later on August 25th. It offers no explanation for the fever and makes no mention of a fall from a horse. This account, with its focus on precise dates and symptoms, reflects the meticulous record-keeping tradition of the Chinese imperial court. It doesn't contradict the Mongol account so much as it complements it. The fall could have caused the initial injury, and the fever could have been the final fatal symptom of the resulting infection or illness. European chroniclers, writing from a great distance, tended to imagine a more conventional end for a great warrior. The Venetian traveler Marco Polo, who served at the court of Genghis's grandson Kublai Khan decades later, wrote that the Khan died from an infection after taking an arrow to the knee. To interpolate an older meme, I used to be a world conqueror. Then I took an arrow to the knee. Another papal envoy, Giovanni da Pian del Carpine, reported an even more dramatic tale, that Genghis Khan was struck by lightning. These accounts are almost certainly second-hand rumors, shaped by a European cultural lens that expected a man of such renown to be felled by an act of God. The most sensational and enduring story is also the one with the least historical credibility. This legend tells of a beautiful Tangut princess, taken as war booty, who exacted a final terrible revenge. In the dead of night, she supposedly used a hidden dagger to either stab or castrate the Khan, causing him to bleed to death before turning the blade on herself. Historians today universally dismiss this tale as folklore or propaganda. It likely emerged long after the fact as a way to give the annihilated Tangut people an act of defiant, symbolic revenge, and to tarnish the conqueror's memory. In the 21st century, the investigation into this nearly 800-year-old cold case has taken a new turn, moving from textual analysis to medical science. A 2021 study published in the International Journal of Infectious Diseases applied modern paleopathology and epidemiology to the sparse clues left in the historical record. Using this information, modern scholars proposed a compelling new theory. By re-examining the clinical details from the history of Yuan, a fever and death within 8 days, researchers concluded the most likely culprit. They proposed that he likely perished from a disease that would soon sweep the world, the bubonic plague. The evidence for this diagnosis is threefold. First, the described symptoms are highly consistent with the plague, which is caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Most crucially, there is contextual evidence suggesting the Mongol army was already in the grip of a plague outbreak during the Tangut campaign in 1226. The idea that the great conqueror was felled not by a blade or a fall, but by the same microscopic organism that eliminated millions of ordinary people, is powerful in its mundanity. Of course, again, this modern diagnosis doesn't necessarily exclude the fall from the horse. A severe injury could have easily weakened his body, leaving him susceptible to the plague that was already ravaging his troops. Ultimately, at present, the actual cause of death of Genghis Khan remains a historical unsolved mystery. Perhaps one day it may conclusively be solved if his burial site is found, but that too is also yet another historical enigma. Hey everyone, Jimmy here with a reminder to hit the notification bell and drop a comment. Also, don't forget that you can support my work for as little as $1 a month through the YouTube membership by clicking that join button. It's the year 1700 in the opulent halls of a Baroque palace in Dresden, a city being meticulously sculpted into what would be called the Florence on the Elbe. The air is thick with the scent of 1,000 candles, illuminating priceless collections of art and the delicate newly invented Meissen porcelain that would soon take Europe by storm. This is the court of Augustus II, Elector of Saxony and King of Poland, a world of ultimate refinement and cultural ambition. Now, into this scene of exquisite taste, picture the ruler himself. He's not composing a sonnet or debating philosophy. Instead, he takes a heavy, cold iron horseshoe, and with a grunt of exertion and the straining of sinew, he bends it with his bare hands until it snaps in two. This wasn't just a fleeting court rumor or a tall tale spun by fawning subjects. This was a performance, and it's a story anchored in reality. In the Dresden Royal Palace today, you can still see a horseshoe the Saxon Hercules broke in February 1711, an artifact accompanied by a document detailing the event. This singular, visceral act captures the profound paradox of the man known to history as Augustus the Strong. His famous epithet wasn't earned through political cunning or military genius. In those arenas, he was often a spectacular failure. It was earned through these personal, almost primal displays of physical power that won him his Herculean nickname even from his detractors. Born in 1670, he was the younger son of an elector, a prince with no reasonable expectation of ever ruling. His youth was spent on the grand tour of Europe, absorbing the culture of its major courts, particularly the unparalleled splendor of Louis XIV's Versailles. His life changed abruptly in 1694, when his older brother, John George IV, died of smallpox, unexpectedly elevating him to the throne of Saxony at the age of 24. But being an elector wasn't enough for a man of his ambition. His eyes were set on a royal crown, that of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Securing it required a series of audacious moves that came to be known as his Polish adventure. First, he converted to Roman Catholicism, a shocking decision for the ruler of Saxony, a bastion of German Protestantism. This act alienated many of his own subjects and his devout Lutheran wife, but it was a necessary prerequisite for the Polish throne. Then came the immense expenditure of Saxon funds to bribe the Polish nobility, whose votes were openly for sale. In 1697, his gambit paid off, and he became King Augustus II of Poland. This pursuit of glory, however, proved to be a poisoned chalice. His reign became a tale of two vastly different realms. In Saxony, he was a brilliant and transformative patron of the arts. He poured resources into his capital, Dresden, commissioning the magnificent palaces and amassing one of Europe's greatest art collections in the Green Vault. Most importantly, though, he established the Meissen factory, which unlocked the secret of true hard-paste porcelain, allowing Europe to produce Chinaware. He was, in this sphere, an undeniable and overwhelming success. In Poland and Lithuania, however, his reign was a catastrophe. He dragged the Commonwealth into the Great Northern War against the formidable Swedish crown. The conflict was a disaster for Augustus. His armies were repeatedly defeated, and he was driven from his Polish throne for several years. His actions allowed the Russian Empire to exert a growing influence that would ultimately lead to Poland's disappearance as an independent state. It's for this reason that modern biographies rightly label his career a disaster. He would eventually be brought back to the Polish throne by the Russians, but the Commonwealth was a shell of its former self. Unable to project strength through military victory or astute statecraft, he compensated in the arenas he could control. He couldn't win on the battlefield, so he staged legendary parties and built breathtaking palaces. He couldn't be a strong general, so he became a literal strongman. The legend of Augustus the Strong was built on specific, repeatable, and often shocking feats that he performed for his court and visiting dignitaries. His most famous party trick was, of course, breaking horseshoes with his bare hands. And seriously, check out the hands on this guy in his official portrait. More like bare hands, am I right? Numerous contemporary accounts describe him performing this feat, which served as the cornerstone of his reputation. He would often challenge visiting dignitaries to send their strongest bodyguard to attempt to break the horseshoe first to prove it was the real deal. Far more disturbing to modern sensibilities was his passion for a cruel aristocratic blood sport known as fox tossing, or Fuchsprellen in German. This was a competitive event where pairs of courtiers, often men and women, would stand in an enclosed courtyard holding a long sling of cloth. Terrified animals were then released and driven across the sling, at which point the participants would pull the ends taut, catapulting the creature high into the air. The goal was to achieve the highest toss, a spectacle that was often fatal for the animal, which could be a fox, hare, badger, or even a wildcat. Augustus dominated this quote-unquote sport in a way that showcased his unique power. He was known to hold his end of the sling with just a single finger, while it took two of the strongest men at his court to manage the other end. The scale of these events was staggering. At one contest he hosted in Dresden to entertain visiting royalty, a gruesome tally was kept. 647 foxes, 533 hares, 34 badgers, and 21 wildcats were tossed in a single day. These public displays of dominance over both inanimate objects and living creatures were performances of a particular kind of 18th century aristocratic masculinity. Physical power and a capacity for casual cruelty were celebrated markers of elite status. While his physical strength seems well documented, it's also important to separate it from the more outlandish myths that grew around his persona. The most famous of these is the claim that his male vitality resulted in him fathering somewhere around 400 illegitimate children with a variety of different mistresses. The true reproductive capacity of the Saxon Hercules is unknown, but he only recognized 8 illegitimate children. For centuries, the tales of Augustus's strength have been accepted as a historical fact, though no one could really explain his bizarre feats. Modern science offers a compelling biological explanation that could reconcile the seemingly impossible feats with reality. It has been theorized that Augustus may have had an extremely rare genetic condition known as myostatin-related muscle hypertrophy. To put it simply, myostatin is a protein that our bodies produce to regulate muscle growth. It acts like a brake, sending signals to our muscles to stop growing so they don't become too large. Myostatin-related muscle hypertrophy is caused by a mutation in the gene responsible for producing this protein. This mutation essentially disables the brake. The results are dramatic. Individuals with the mutation can have up to twice the usual amount of muscle mass, accompanied by significantly increased strength and reduced body fat. Crucially, the condition isn't known to cause any adverse medical problems or to impact intelligence, which aligns perfectly with the historical profile of Augustus. This genetic condition provides the most plausible mechanism for how a man of his era, without modern training or nutrition, could perform feats like snapping iron horseshoes. While it's impossible to confirm without a DNA sample, it offers a scientifically grounded hypothesis that fits the historical evidence remarkably well. There's even a tantalizing hint of a hereditary link that provides additional evidence for this. One of his ancestors from centuries earlier, Cymburgis of Masovia, was also famous for her exceptional physical strength. She was said to be able to crack open walnuts between her fingers and engage in other activities of extreme strength. Notably, these weren't viewed as positive traits for a noble woman, and contemporary records seem to indicate a sort of embarrassment about her feats of strength. This, of course, likely makes a great deal of sense given that she lived in the 15th century and may have been physically stronger than her husband. This scientific lens adds a profound layer of irony to his story. Augustus consciously built his entire public image around his strength, using it as a symbol of his innate power and will, the Saxon Hercules destined to rule. He portrayed himself as someone who worked extremely hard to cultivate his strength, and he presented it as an extension of his character. Yet, if the genetic theory is correct, this defining characteristic wasn't a product of discipline or spirit, but an involuntary biological accident. The very foundation of his carefully crafted strongman persona was likely something entirely beyond his control, a fluke of nature that he skillfully leveraged into a political asset. That said, this isn't to discount the fact that he clearly put in physical work to cultivate his strength. In the final analysis, the evidence strongly suggests that the physical power of Augustus the Strong was no myth. It was a real, observable, and probably genetic trait, vouched for by contemporary accounts and substantiated by surviving artifacts. Yet, the ultimate irony of his life is that this incredible, almost superhuman strength proved utterly useless in the arenas that truly defined a monarch's success. His life forces us to draw a sharp distinction between a strong man and a strong leader. Augustus mastered the performance of physical strength. He broke iron, he tossed wild animals with a single finger, and he cultivated an unforgettable image as the Saxon Hercules. He was, in the most literal sense of the words, a strong man, but he failed to become a strong leader. His political judgment was frequently disastrous, and his military career was a litany of failures that weakened his own position. While his son was elected as the king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Augustus didn't want any more elections. He wanted the crown to become hereditary to his family, a feat which he didn't achieve. In a bizarre twist, his lasting legacy lies not in the memory of his muscles, but in the exquisite products of a refined taste that stood in such stark contrast to the raw power of his body. His legacy instead is found in the delicate perfection of the Meissen porcelain that has been produced by the factory he founded for over 300 years.